The Duke's hand slammed against the table so hard that every glass in the room shook. "Find her!" 2 words. That was all he said, but the 7 men standing before him felt the air leave their lungs at once. No one moved. No one breathed. The fire crackling behind him threw shadows across his face, and in that moment, every single one of them understood something without being told. This was not a request. This was not the calm order of a man conducting business. This was a man on the edge of something dark and consuming, a man who had not slept in 3 days, whose collar was undone, whose jaw was tight as iron, and whose eyes carried the kind of fury that only comes from one thing. Not betrayal, not humiliation. Loss. She had been in his arms just weeks ago. Warm, real, laughing softly into the curve of his neck in a moment he had not planned and could not explain. And then, like smoke, she was gone. No letter, no word. Nothing but a faint trail of rosewater in the air and an empty space where she had stood. The Duke of Ravenmore did not chase women. Every soul in the kingdom knew that. Women chased him, and he tolerated it with cold politeness. But this one, this infuriating, quiet, sharp-eyed woman, had somehow slipped past every wall he had ever built, and now he could not eat, could not think, could not sit in his own study without catching her scent on the curtains. He was losing his mind, and he did not care. Search every village, every inn, every coaching house between here and the northern counties, he said quietly, which was somehow more frightening than shouting. And when you find her, you do not touch her. You do not frighten her. You bring me word, and I will go myself. One of the men dared to ask, "Your Grace, who exactly are we looking for?" The Duke turned slowly toward the window, staring out at the dark kingdom spread before him. "You will know her," he said. "She smells like rain and roses, and she has my heart, whether she wants it or not. Now, before we go further into this story, tell me something. If someone walked away from you without a single word of explanation, would you search the whole world for them, or would you let them go? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story already has your attention, hit that subscribe button right now, because what comes next will absolutely wreck you. Let's go. The night it all began, nobody was supposed to be in the East Wing. The annual Midsummer Gala at Ravenmore Castle was in full roar. Champagne flowed like rivers. Violins screamed with joy. Ladies in ivory and gold twirled across the grand ballroom floor, while lords watched with hungry, calculating eyes. Outside, fireworks split the sky open in bursts of amber and rose. Inside, every candle in the castle blazed, and the laughter of 300 aristocrats filled every corridor. Nobody noticed when one woman slipped away from it all. Lyrian Fael pressed her back against the cold stone wall of the east corridor and exhaled slowly. Her chest hurt from smiling. Her feet ached from curtsying. She had been introduced to 11 different lords in one evening, each one looking at her the way men look at land they want to purchase. She was the daughter of the late Baron Vael, which meant she had a title but no money, a name but no power, and a face that attracted exactly the wrong kind of attention. She needed air. She needed silence. She needed 5 minutes away from the noise and the perfume and the suffocating weight of expectation. What she did not need was to open the wrong door and walk straight into the private study of Carith Draven, the Duke of Ravenmore. He was standing at his desk, with his back to the door, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, reading something by candlelight. The room smelled like old books and cedar and something warm she could not name. She froze in the doorway. He turned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Lyrian had seen the Duke from across the ballroom earlier in the evening, Everyone had. He was the kind of man a room reorganizes itself around without being asked. Tall, dark-haired, with the sort of stillness that made people nervous. He had spoken to almost no one all night, moving through his own party like a ghost who owned the house. She had noticed him noticing nothing, which she found oddly fascinating. But up close, he was something else entirely. His eyes were grey. Not the soft grey of clouds, but the hard grey of flint, the kind that makes sparks when struck. They moved over her face with an expression she could not read, and she felt something shift in her chest that she immediately decided to ignore. "You are lost," he said. It was not a question. "I am not lost," she said, which was a lie. "I simply chose the wrong door." That is the definition of lost. She lifted her chin. "I disagree. Lost implies panic. I am perfectly calm." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. No, not quite a smile. Something quieter than that, and somehow more dangerous. "Then you are the calmest trespasser I have ever encountered," he said. She should have apologized. She should have curtsied and retreated and gone back to the ballroom and spent the rest of the evening pretending this had never happened. That is what every sensible woman in her position would have done. Instead, she stepped fully into the room and looked around with open curiosity. "You have more books than most libraries," she said. "I read." "Clearly." She tilted her head at the spine of the one open on his desk. "Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, at your own party. That is either very impressive or very sad." This time it was an actual smile. Small, brief, reluctant, like something that escaped before he could stop it. It changed his whole face entirely. "Don't sit down," he said quietly. She sat. They talked for 2 hours straight. She did not plan it. He did not invite it formally. But somehow the conversation simply opened up between them, like a door neither of them had known was there. He asked her opinion on things no lord had ever thought to ask her about: philosophy, agricultural reform, whether happiness was a destination or a habit. She gave him honest answers, not careful ones, and he listened in a way that made her feel like the only person in the world with anything worth hearing. Outside, the gala continued. Inside, the candles burned lower and lower. At some point, the fireworks stopped. At some point, the music faded. They did not notice either thing. What happened next came slowly, and then all at once. The conversation softened. The space between them closed. He reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face with one careful finger, and she didn't pull back. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and something passed between them that was too honest and too warm to be stopped by logic or caution. They made love that night, slowly, tenderly, with the candles burning down to nothing and the castle going completely quiet around them. It was nothing like she had expected, and everything she had never let herself want. He was gentle in a way that surprised her. She was bold in a way that surprised herself. And when it was over, she lay against his chest in the dark, listening to his heartbeat slowly, and felt something she had never once felt in her life before. Completely and utterly seen, and completely and utterly terrified. Because she also knew, with a clarity that felt like ice water, exactly who she was. A woman with no money, no security, no powerful family to protect her. And he was the Duke of Ravenmore, one of the most influential men in the kingdom, a man whose name alone opened doors and closed others, a man whose world had absolutely no permanent place for someone like her. What had just happened would ruin her if anyone found out, and it would mean nothing to him by morning. Men like him did not lose sleep over women like her. They moved on quickly and cleanly and without guilt. So she would move on first. She rose without a sound while he slept, dressed in the dark with hands that barely trembled, found her shoes by the cold fireplace, and walked out of Ravenmore Castle before a single servant stirred, or before the grey dawn could witness her heart break, or the way she pressed one hand flat against the stone wall just outside his door and stood there for 10 full seconds, breathing in the last trace of him. Then she walked away. By the time the Duke of Ravenmore opened his eyes, the room was empty, and the sheets beside him were cold. He sat up slowly, looked at the space where she had been, said nothing for a long time. Then he got up, dressed, and walked to his window. He did not know her name. He had never thought to ask, and she had never offered it, which struck him now as extraordinary. He knew the sound of her laugh, and the shape of her opinions, and the exact way her eyes sharpened when she was about to disagree with him. He knew how she felt in his arms, and how she had sighed his name just once, softly, like a question she was afraid to finish. He did not know what to call her. The morning spread out cold and pale across his lands. Somewhere beyond those gates, she was already disappearing into it. He pressed his fingers against the glass. "Who are you?" he said, quietly. To no one at all. 3 weeks passed. The Duke of Ravenmore conducted his affairs with the same cold precision that had always defined him. He attended sessions at the House of Lords. He reviewed his estates. He accepted 3 dinner invitations and deflected 2 marriage proposals through his secretary without breaking his routine by a single minute. To everyone around him, he was exactly as he had always been, controlled, distant, immovable. Internally, he was unraveling completely. It started with small things. The curtains in his study caught a certain scent in the morning light, something faint and floral with an undercurrent of rain, and it made concentration impossible. Then it was the chair she had sat in. He found himself standing in front of it one afternoon for a full minute before he realized he had walked there without deciding to. Then it was the copy of Aristotle still open on his desk at the exact page it had been on the night she walked in, and turned his entire world sideways. He did not move the book. His valet, a careful and long-suffering man named Pethwick, noticed the change and said absolutely nothing, because he had served the Duke for 14 years and had a strong instinct for self-preservation. His secretary, a sharp young man named Aldous Fenn, also noticed and made the mistake of mentioning it once. "Your Grace, you have cancelled the Harwick meeting twice now. Shall I reschedule for a 3rd time, or would you prefer I simply inform Lord Harwick that—" "Reschedule it," the Duke said, without looking up from nothing in particular. Aldous Fenn wrote it down and retreated quickly. The Duke's younger sister, Lady Petra Draven, arrived from her estate in the country in the 4th week and took one look at her brother across the breakfast table and said, "You look terrible. What happened?" "Nothing happened. Kyreth, I have known you since you were 7 years old and terrified of thunderstorms but refused to admit it. Do not tell me nothing happened." He said nothing. Petra helped herself to toast and studied him with the particular sharpness of a woman who had grown up watching her older brother keep every feeling locked behind 6 different doors. She had learned long ago how to read the spaces between what he said. "It is a woman," she said. He picked up his coffee. "It is absolutely a woman," she said, with more certainty. "Petra, I am not judging. I am fascinated. You once told me romantic attachment was a form of temporary insanity, brought on by proximity and novelty. You gave a very long speech about it. I took notes. I was 22. You were 26, actually. It was at my wedding." She tilted her head. "Who is she?" The silence that followed was long enough to tell her everything. You do not know, she said slowly. You do not know who she is. He set down his coffee. I know what I need to know, which is that I need to find her. Petra stared at him for a moment. Then she did something she had not done in years. She reached across the breakfast table and covered his hand with hers. Then find her, she said simply. That afternoon, the Duke summoned 7 men into his private study. They were not footmen or household staff. They were the kind of men who knew how to move quietly through the kingdom without being noticed, men who were paid well for their discretion and their results. He had used them before for matters of business and estate. He had never used them for anything like this. He described her. He did it with an efficiency and a precision that surprised even himself, because he had not realized how much he had absorbed in those 2 hours. The exact shade of her dark brown hair, the particular directness of her eyes, amber with a rim of something darker around the edge. The way she held herself, like someone who had learned dignity the hard way and wore it without apology. The small scar, faint as a whisper, just below her left jaw. The scent of rosewater and rain that seemed to follow her like her own private weather. He told them she was likely the daughter of a minor noble family. He told them she had been at the Midsummer Gala, which meant her name was somewhere on the guest registry. He told them to start there. And when you find her, he said, his voice dropping to something very quiet, you do not approach her. You do not speak to her. You send a word to me immediately, and I go myself. The 7 men nodded and dispersed. Aldous Fenn, standing to one side with his notebook, cleared his throat carefully. Your Grace, the guest registry from the gala lists 283 names, or 61 of those are women, attending without a husband or father present. Shall I begin cross-referencing with the physical description you have provided? The Duke looked at him. You already started, didn't you? I began the moment you started describing the scar, Your Grace. Something shifted in Kerith Draven's expression. Not warmth exactly, but the closest thing to gratitude his face knew how to form. Narrow it to daughters of baron-level families or below, he said. She spoke like someone educated but not wealthy. She knew Aristotle, but her gown, though well-made, was not new. Aldous wrote quickly. That brings us to approximately 19 names. Then we start with 19. Meanwhile, 2 counties away, Lyrian Vielle was doing what she had always done when her world became too dangerous to stay in, while she was rebuilding herself somewhere new. She had a cousin, a warm and wonderfully nosy woman named Drusilla Vale, who lived in the market town of Ashford with her husband, a good-natured merchant named Corbett Ashby, and their 4 loud, joyful children. Drusilla had written to Lyrian 3 times in the past year, urging her to come and stay. Lyrian had always declined politely. She showed up on Drusilla's doorstep at 7 in the morning, with 1 trunk, shadows under her eyes, and a smile so obviously manufactured that Drusilla took 1 look at her and pulled her straight inside without a single question. She asked all the questions later, of course, over tea, in the small, bright kitchen, while the children thundered overhead. You look like someone who has made a decision they cannot unmake, Drusilla said, depouring the tea with the calm of a woman who had survived 4 labours and a flooding cellar. I am fine, Lyrian said. You are the opposite of fine. You are so far from fine that fine is a small dot in the distance. Drusilla sat down. What happened at the Ravenmoor Gala? Your last letter said you were dreading it. Your silence since then says something happened. Lyrian wrapped both hands around her cup. Nothing happened. Drusilla looked at her cousin for a long time, with the knowing eyes of someone who had loved her since childhood. All right, she said finally. Nothing happened. Now drink your tea and meet my children properly, and we will find you something useful to do in this town, before your mind eats you alive." Lyrian almost smiled. "Oh, that is the most accurate prescription anyone has ever given me." She settled into Drusilla's house, like someone trying very hard not to settle, keeping one part of herself always slightly apart, always slightly ready to leave again. She helped in Corbett's shop. She taught the 2 older children their letters in the afternoons. She attended the small local church on Sundays and smiled at the right moments and answered questions about herself with just enough truth to seem open and just enough vagueness to remain hidden. She didn't think about the Duke. She thought about him constantly. She thought about the way he had listened to her, really listened, like her words had weight and her thoughts had value, and she was not simply a title attached to a problem to be solved through marriage. She thought about his hands and his voice and the grey of his eyes in candlelight. She thought about waking up against his warmth and the moment, the exact moment. She had understood that she needed to leave before she made the catastrophic mistake of wanting to stay. She pressed all of it down hard and kept it there. 17 days into her stay in Ashford, a stranger arrived in town. He was quiet, well-dressed in a plain way that suggested he was trying not to be noticed, and he spent a morning visiting the inn, the church registry office, and the post house before leaving again before noon. Nobody thought anything of it, except Lyrian, who happened to be passing the post house window at exactly the right moment, and saw the man inside speaking to the postmaster and showing him something small, something that looked very much like a piece of paper with writing on it. She walked on without stopping, but her heart had started to move faster. She told herself she was imagining things. She told herself the world was full of quiet, well-dressed men with pieces of paper, and none of them had anything to do with her. She almost believed it. That night, she lay awake in Drusilla's spare room, staring at the ceiling and listening to the town settle into silence, and thought about how long she had before the quiet, well-dressed men found the right name on the right list and followed the trail to the right door. Not long, she thought. Not long at all. The name came to Aldous Fenn on a Tuesday morning, sitting at his desk with a cold cup of tea and a list of 19 women that had been slowly shrinking for 10 days. Lyrian Vile, the daughter of the late Baron Vale of Westmore, age 24. Unmarried. No current known address following the sale of Westmore House 18 months ago after her father's debts were settled. Last confirmed attendance at a social event, the Ravenmore Midsummer Gala. He read it twice. Then he walked directly to the Duke's study and knocked. "Come in." Aldous placed the paper on the desk without a preamble. "I believe this is her, Your Grace." Kerith Dreven read the entry once. Something in his face changed, very slightly, in the way a locked room changes when someone finally finds the right key. "Lyrian," he said quietly. It suited her completely. He did not know why he was certain of that, but he was. "She has no fixed address," Aldous continued carefully, "but her father's estate records show one living relative on her mother's side, was a cousin, a Mrs. Dr. Drusilla Ashby, residing in Ashford, Merwick County." The Duke was already standing. "Have my horse ready," he said. "Your Grace, the Harwick meeting is this afternoon, and Lord Harwick has already rescheduled twice, and sent a rather pointed... Send him my apologies and a very good bottle of wine." Aldous opened his mouth, closed it, wrote something in his notebook. "And shall I inform Lady Petra of your departure? She will figure it out." He was right. Petra Dreven appeared at the top of the staircase as her brother crossed the entrance hall, pulling on his riding gloves with the focused energy of a man who had already left in his head and was simply waiting for his body to catch up. She looked at his face and understood immediately. "You found her name," she said. "I found her name." Petra gripped the banister. "Kerith, think carefully about how you do this. If she left without a word, she had a reason." He paused at the door. "I know she had a reason." "Then go carefully." He looked at his sister for a moment, with something unguarded in his expression, something she had not seen on his face in a very long time. "I intend to," he said. Then he was gone. Ashford was a full day's ride through open countryside, which gave Kerith Draven approximately 8 hours alone with his own thoughts, which was 8 hours more than he wanted. He rode hard for the first 2 hours, then settled into a steady pace when the urgency in his chest became something he could manage rather than something managing him. He thought about what he was doing. He was, by any rational measure, behaving in a way that would have deeply concerned the version of himself from 3 months ago. He was riding an entire county away to find a woman he had spent one evening with, a woman who had made it very clear by her absence that she did not want to be found. He had no logical argument for this. He had no reasonable explanation he could offer anyone, including himself. What he had was the memory of her voice in his study, sharp and warm and entirely unafraid of him, the memory of her eyes in candlelight, the memory of lying awake after she had fallen asleep against him, and feeling, for the first time in as long as he could remember, that the room he was in was exactly the right size. He was not a man who acted on feeling. He had spent 31 years being very thorough about that. Delirian Vile had apparently dismantled 31 years of careful architecture in 2 hours and 1 night, and then walked out before he could do anything about it. He was going to do something about it. He arrived in Ashford as the afternoon light went golden and long across the market square. It was a pleasant town, busy without being frantic, full of the particular warmth of a place where people actually knew each other. He did not ride straight to the Ashby house. Instead, he left his horse at the inn, took a room under a name that was not his, changed out of his riding clothes, and spent an hour walking the town slowly. He was not ready to simply knock on a door. He wanted to see her first, in her natural state, in this place she had chosen. He wanted to understand what she had built here before he arrived and rearranged it. He found her in the last place he expected. She was in the market square, standing beside a vegetable stall, engaged in what appeared to be a very serious debate with an elderly stallholder about the correct price of carrots. She had a basket over one arm, and her hair pinned up loosely, and she was gesturing with her free hand in a way that was completely recognizable to him, that specific, sharp little movement she made when she was making a point she considered obvious, and was frustrated that it needed making at all. The stallholder, a stout, red-faced man of about 60, was holding his own admirably. Kerith stopped walking. She looked entirely different, and completely the same. She was dressed simply, nothing like the careful gown of the gala, and she looked lighter somehow, less armored. Or she was laughing now because the stallholder had apparently said something funny, and the laugh hit Kerith somewhere directly behind the sternum with a force that was almost physical. He stood very still and watched her pay for the carrots, exchange a few more words with the old man, and turned to leave. She turned directly toward him. She saw him in the same instant he saw her see him. The laugh died. The color left her face completely. The basket dropped 3 inches before she caught it. A single betraying flinch that told him everything about how unexpected and unwelcome this moment was for her. They stared at each other across 20 feet of Market Square, while the town moved cheerfully around them, entirely indifferent to the fact that something enormous was happening in its center. He did not move toward her. He had promised Petra he would go carefully, and he intended to keep that promise, even though every instinct he had was pulling him across that square like a tide. She moved first. Not toward him. She turned, quickly, and walked in the other direction. He followed at a distance, not chasing, just keeping her in sight. And when she turned into a quieter street and realized he was still there, she stopped and spun around to face him with her chin up and her eyes bright with something that was either fury or fear or both. "How?" she said. The word came out sharp and breathless. "Guest registry," he said, "and a very thorough secretary. You had no right. Perhaps not. Then why are you here?" He looked at her steadily. "Because I did not know your name, and it was making me lose my mind. Because you left without a word, and I have not slept properly since. Because I know everything about how you think, and nothing about who you are, and that is an imbalance I find intolerable." She stared at him. Her grip on the basket had gone white-knuckled. "I left," she said slowly and clearly, as if explaining something to someone very stubborn, "because leaving was the only sensible thing to do." Sensible? Yes, sensible. You are a duke, Your Grace. I am nobody. You are Lyrian Vael. That is not a contradiction of what I just said. He took one step toward her. Just one. I am not here to ruin you, or expose you, or make demands of any kind. I am here because I need to see your face, and hear your voice, and know that you are real and not simply something I dreamed. The fury in her eyes softened by the smallest fraction. Then she shut it down hard. "Go back to Ravenmoor," she said. "Have dinner with me." "Absolutely not." "Then walk with me. Right now. 10 minutes. You can return to being furious with me afterward." She looked at him for a long moment. The market square noise drifted around the corner. A cat crossed the street between them. He waited. 10 minutes, she said finally. "And then you leave?" He nodded. They walked. 10 minutes became an hour. Neither of them mentioned it. They walked through the quieter streets of Orschven, while the afternoon softened into early evening, and the lamplighters began their rounds, and Lyrian told herself with every step that she was in complete control of this situation, and that she could end it at any moment. She did not end it. He walked beside her without crowding her, without reaching for her, without doing any of the things she had braced herself against. He asked her questions, the same way he had in his study that night, with that particular quality of attention that she had never encountered in any other person, and had not been able to stop thinking about for 5 weeks. He asked how she had come to be in Ashford. She gave him the vague version. He accepted it without pushing. He asked about her cousin, about the town, about whether she was happy here. She answered more honestly than she intended to. "Happy is a strong word," she said. "I am settled. I am useful. I am not afraid." "Were you afraid before?" She glanced at him sideways. "I was afraid at the gala. Every unmarried woman with no money and a borrowed gown is afraid of those things. Or the stakes are very high and very humiliating when they do not go well." "Your gown was not borrowed," he said. "It was well made, older, but well made." She stopped walking. "You noticed that?" "I notice everything about you. I noticed it then, and I have been noticing it since." He said it without drama, without any attempt to make it sound romantic. He said it the way he said everything, as a plain and observable fact, which somehow made it 10 times more devastating than poetry would have been. She started walking again. Faster. "That is exactly the problem," she said. "What is?" "You. The way you do that. The way you make everything feel." She stopped, searching for the word. "Weight-bearing. Like everything matters, like I matter. And I need you to understand that that is a very effective way to make someone feel things they should not feel, and I cannot afford to feel those things." He was quiet for a moment. "Why can you not afford it?" Because nothing good comes of a woman in my position feeling things for a man in yours. History is very clear on this subject. Literature is even clearer. It ends one way, and it is not a happy way. You are quoting history and literature to me to explain why you will not have dinner with me. I am quoting history and literature to you to explain why you should get back on your horse and return to your extremely large castle and find someone appropriate to feel things about. They had reached a small bridge over a narrow river. She stopped at the railing, or the water below caught the last of the evening light and broke it into moving pieces. He stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and looked at the water too. "I had a fiancé," he said suddenly. She looked at him sharply. This was not what she had expected. 3 years ago, he continued. Lady Fenwick's eldest daughter. It was arranged between our families when we were both young. She was perfectly pleasant and entirely indifferent to me, which I understand now was mutual, though I did not have the self-awareness to recognize it at the time. We were together for 2 years before she broke the engagement and married a viscount from the northern counties within 4 months. "I am sorry," Lyrian said quietly. "Do not be. She was right to do it. We would have made each other quietly miserable for decades." He paused. "What I am telling you is that I am not a man who has been waiting to feel something. I stopped expecting to feel anything at all. I had decided, quite firmly, that I was simply not built for it." She looked at him. The evening light made his face look different, softer, less like armor. "And then you walked into my study," he said, "and talked back to me about Aristotle." She almost laughed. She stopped it just in time. "That is a terrible basis for—" she started. "I know," he said. "I am not pretending it is logical. I am telling you it is true." The river moved quietly below them. Somewhere in the town, a church bell rang 7 times. Lyrian gripped the railing and fought a battle inside herself that she was not sure she was winning. "Whilst I have nothing to offer you," she said. "No connections, no fortune, no family name that means anything. I would be a liability in your world. People would talk. They would assume the worst, because the worst would be the most obvious explanation." "People always talk," he said. "I have never particularly cared." "You should care. It is your reputation." "My reputation is solid enough to survive a dinner." She turned to face him fully. "You are being deliberately obtuse." "I am being deliberately honest. There is a difference. Why does this matter to you? Truly. You could have any woman in the kingdom." He looked at her with those flint-grey eyes that had been dismantling her composure for 5 weeks in memory, and were doing the same thing in person with frankly unreasonable efficiency. "I do not want any woman in the kingdom," he said simply. "I want to have dinner with you. Tomorrow evening, at the inn on the market square, in full public view, so that your reputation is entirely protected, and you have absolutely nothing to fear from agreeing." She stared at him. "You have already made a reservation," she said slowly. "You arrived today, and you have already made a reservation." The corner of his mouth moved. "I made it an hour ago, when we passed the inn, and I could see through the window that it was a respectable establishment, with good lighting, and a dining room visible from the street. You are unbelievable. Is that a yes?" She looked away from him at the river, and the last pale strip of light above the rooftops, and the lamplit streets of this small, safe town that she had chosen very deliberately, because it was nothing like his world. She thought about 5 weeks of pressing things down, and the way they kept rising anyway. She thought about how she had felt in his arms, and how terrifying that feeling was, precisely because it was so complete. She thought about Drusilla, who would absolutely never let her hear the end of this regardless of what she decided. "One dinner," she said, "and you do not tell anyone who you are, or you are simply a friend of a friend passing through Ashford." "Agreed. And after dinner we are finished. You go home, I'm staying here, and we both accept that this is a very sweet and very impossible thing that cannot become anything more." He looked at her steadily. "One dinner," he said. She nodded once and pushed off from the railing and walked back toward Drusilla's house without looking back, because she knew, with complete and devastating certainty, that if she looked back, she would see him watching her go with those grey eyes, and she was already in enough trouble. She heard his footsteps stop at the bridge. She did not hear him leave for a long time. Inside Drusilla's house, chaos greeted her at the door in the form of the youngest child, 4-year-old Pip, who had somehow gotten jam on the ceiling and was being very philosophical about it. Drusilla was on a chair trying to reach it with a cloth, and her husband Corbett was laughing unhelpfully from the doorway, and the 2 older children, 12-year-old Hattie and 10-year-old Fen, were loudly disagreeing about whose fault it was, while the baby, little Bram, watched from his basket with the serene expression of someone completely uninvolved. Lyrian set down her basket and took the cloth from Drusilla and dealt with the ceiling jam without comment. "Thank you," Drusilla said, climbing down. She looked at Lyrian's face. "You have the expression of someone who has just agreed to something they told themselves they would not agree to." "I have no such expression. Lyrian, my darling cousin, I watched you bargain down that carrot man for 20 minutes from my upstairs window. I know every face you make." She lowered her voice, while Corbett herded the children toward the kitchen. "There was a man in the square today. Tall, dark hair. Watching you with the kind of focus that would be alarming if it were not so obviously devoted." Lyrian said nothing. "He is still in town," Drusilla said. "Corbett saw him at the inn taking supper. Very quiet, very well-mannered, tipped the serving girl outrageously." She paused. "Who is he, Leary?" Lyrian carried the cloth to the basin and rinsed it carefully. "Someone I met," she said, "from before you came here. Yes, from the gala." Lyrian closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she opened them and turned around. "I am having dinner with him tomorrow. At the inn. In public. But that is all it is." Drusilla's expression went through several stages very rapidly before settling on something that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite succeeding. "All right," she said. "Do not make it something it is not." "I am saying nothing." "You are saying everything with your face." Drusilla pressed her lips together. "I will simply say this one thing, and then I will be completely silent on the subject. You have been in my house for nearly 3 weeks, and in that time you have been perfectly kind and perfectly helpful and perfectly miserable underneath all of it. And whatever happened with this man, whatever sent you running here with one trunk and shadows under your eyes, I hope you are careful." She paused. But I also hope you are not so careful that you miss something real." Lyrian looked at her cousin for a long moment. "I know what I am doing," she said. Drusilla nodded and went to help with dinner and said nothing more. Upstairs that night, Lyrian sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and pressed her hands flat on her knees and told herself very firmly that one dinner was simply one dinner, and she was a practical and clear-headed woman who had made difficult decisions before and could make them again. She thought about his voice on the bridge. "I do not want any woman in the kingdom." She pressed her hands harder against her knees. "Want dinner," she told herself. "Just one." The inn on the market square was called the Greystone, and it was exactly as respectable as Careth had assessed through the window. Clean white tablecloths, The candles in proper holders, a dining room visible from the street through 2 large windows, which meant that anyone passing could see exactly who was inside and doing absolutely nothing scandalous. Lyrian arrived 3 minutes late on purpose, because arriving on time would have suggested she had been ready early, which she had been, which was information he did not need. He was already at the table. He stood when she entered, which was such an automatic and unperformed gesture that it landed differently than it would have from a man who was doing it to impress her. He was dressed simply, dark jacket, white shirt, no ducal crest or signet ring in sight, and he looked so completely like an ordinary man that she almost forgot for a moment what he actually was. Almost. "You are late," he said. "I am 3 minutes late," she said, Orc sitting down. "That is practically punctual. It is precisely not punctual. Are you going to be difficult about this?" "I am going to be exactly as I always am," he said. "You are the one who finds it difficult." She looked at him across the table and felt the corner of her mouth betray her. The dinner began. It was, by any external measure, a perfectly ordinary meal. The food was good, simple country cooking with generous portions. The wine was decent. The other diners around them were local families and travelling merchants who paid them no particular attention. From the street outside, anyone glancing in would have seen 2 people having a quiet dinner, talking, occasionally laughing, entirely unremarkable. Internally it was nothing like ordinary. He had brought something with him, a small book, which he produced from his jacket pocket and set on the table beside his wine glass, without explanation. She looked at it. "You brought a book to dinner." "I brought it for you," he said. "It is not a gift. I am lending it. I expect it will be returned." She picked it up. It was slim and worn at the spine, a collection of essays by a political philosopher she had mentioned in passing during their conversation at the gala. She had said she had never been able to find a copy. She stared at it. "You remembered that," she said. "I remember everything you said." She set the book down carefully and looked at him, and for a moment her composure cracked, just slightly, just enough for something real to show through before she collected herself. "That is not fair," she said quietly. "No," he agreed. "What it is not." They ate in a comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of silence that only exists between people who have moved past the need to fill every gap with noise. Then he said, "Tell me about your father." She looked up. "Why?" "Because you mentioned him once, at the gala, just briefly. You said he was a man who believed very strongly in doing the right thing, and was catastrophically bad at the practical elements of survival. I thought about that sentence for 2 weeks. She set down her fork. He was exactly that. He was the kindest man I have ever known, and the worst manager of money in the history of the barony. He gave it away constantly, to tenants, to causes, to anyone with a compelling story, and he borrowed against the estate to do it, and by the time he died there was nothing left but debt and a very large house that had to be sold to pay it. You are not angry at him. I was. For about 6 months after he died, I was absolutely furious. Then I realized I would rather have had him exactly as he was for 24 years than a wealthier and colder version for longer. She picked up her fork again. He used to say that a full ledger and an empty heart was the saddest kind of success. Carith was quiet for a moment. My father used to say that sentiment was the enemy of efficiency. They would have hated each other. Profoundly, he agreed, and there was something in his voice that was both dry and sad at once. What was he like? She asked, because she found she genuinely wanted to know. Formidable. Brilliant, or completely unable to be in the same room as anyone without making them feel they were being assessed and found slightly wanting. He ran the dukedom like a general runs a campaign, with total precision and very little warmth. He died when I was 19 and left me in a state in perfect financial order and absolutely no instruction on how to be a person. The candlelight moved between them. "Petra," Lyrian said, "your sister. You are close to her." "She taught me most of what I know about being human," he said simply. "She is 8 years younger than me and approximately 40 years wiser. She sounds wonderful." "She would like you enormously," he said. "She would also immediately begin scheming, so I would introduce you cautiously and in a public place." Lyrian looked at him. The words had landed so naturally. "I would introduce you," but as if it were simply a matter of when, as if the future he was casually describing was a real and settled thing. She felt the pull of it, warm and dangerous, like standing too close to a fire in winter. "Kerith," she said quietly. His name in her mouth felt strange and right at the same time. "I know," he said. He was not pretending not to understand. "I know what you are about to say." "Then I do not need to say it." "Say it anyway." She looked at the candle between them. "This dinner is exactly what I knew it would be, which is the problem. You are exactly what I knew you would be, and I can sit here and enjoy this, and feel all the things I have been trying not to feel for 5 weeks. And then tomorrow you will go back to your world, and I will stay in mine. And the distance between them will be exactly what it has always been, which is too large for anything real to cross." He was quiet. "I am not saying this to be dramatic," she continued. "I am saying it because it is true, and I would rather say it plainly than let us both pretend the evening is something it cannot be." He leaned forward slightly. "What if the distance is not as fixed as you think it is? It is fixed by law and custom and the expectations of every person in your social world. I am not asking about their expectations. You should be. You live inside them whether you acknowledge them or not." He held her gaze. "I am 31 years old. I have run one of the largest estates in the kingdom since I was 19. I have never in my life made a decision because someone else expected it of me." He paused. "I am not going to start now." The dining room hummed quietly around them, or a child at a nearby table dropped a spoon with a tremendous clatter. The mother apologized. The innkeeper brought more bread. The world continued being entirely ordinary. Lyrian picked up the small book he had brought and held it in both hands and looked at the worn spine. "You said you expected this to return," she said. "I did. That implies a future occasion." "It does." She looked at him for a long time. The battle inside her was quieter than it had been the night before, which was either a good sign or a very bad one. She could not yet tell. "I have conditions," she said finally. Something shifted in his expression. Careful. Attentive. "Tell me. You do not rush this. Whatever this is, you do not arrive with expectations or timelines, or you do not make promises you cannot keep, simply because this dinner has gone well and you are feeling optimistic. Agreed. You are honest with me. About everything. If your circumstances change, if the reality of what I am becomes a problem for your world, you tell me directly and we stop. Agreed. And you understand that I am not a project or a rescue. I am not waiting to be saved from my situation. I am managing perfectly well, and I do not need a duke to fix anything for me." "I know that," he said. "I knew that the moment you walked into my study and started criticizing my reading choices." She almost smiled. "One more condition. Name it. You go home tomorrow. We write letters first. Real ones. Before anything else happens in person, I want to know who you are on paper. because anyone can be charming at a candle-lit dinner, but very few people are honest in a letter. He considered this. "I will go home tomorrow," he said, "and I will write you a letter from the road." She raised an eyebrow. "From the road?" "I am an efficient man." This time she did smile, and she did not stop it, and the way his eyes changed when she did made her chest hurt pleasantly. "All right," she said. They finished dinner. He walked her to the end of the street nearest Drusilla's house and stopped there, leaving an appropriate distance between them, nothing that could be observed or commented on by the 3 neighbours who were definitely watching from their windows, because this was Ashfan, and everyone watched everything. "Good night, Lyrian Vile," he said. "Good night, Careth Draven," she said. She walked to Drusilla's door without looking back. She was smiling before she reached it. Inside, Drusilla was sitting in the front room with a cup of tea and a book that she was very visibly not reading. "Not a word," Lyrian said, hanging up her coat. "I have said nothing." "Your face is saying volumes." "My face is perfectly blank." Lyrian sat down in the chair across from her. Outside, she heard the faint sound of hooves on cobblestone, and knew, without looking, that it was him riding towards the inn, and she sat very still and listened until the sound faded. "He is kind," she said quietly. "That is the most dangerous thing about him. He is genuinely, unexpectedly kind." Drusilla set down her book. "Is that so terrible?" Lyrian looked at the fire. "It is when you have spent your whole life preparing for people to be otherwise." The letter arrived 8 days later. Lyrian was in the back garden helping Hattie plant seedlings, when Corbett appeared at the garden gate with a slightly awed expression and an envelope so thick it was practically a document. The handwriting on the front was precise and unhurried, her name written as if it had been thought about. Hattie immediately tried to read the front of it. "It is private," Lyrian said, tucking it under her arm. "Is it from a man?" Hattie asked, because she was 12 and had recently decided romance was the most interesting subject in existence. "It is from a correspondent." "That is the same thing." Lyrian went inside. She sat at the small writing desk in her room and opened the letter carefully and spread the pages out and read it slowly, from the first word to the last, and then she sat back and pressed one hand over her mouth and stared at the ceiling. It was extraordinary. Not in the way of flowery, romantic declarations. There was none of that. He wrote the way he spoke, directly and without ornamentation, but there was something in the directness that was more intimate than poetry. He wrote about the ride home from Ashfan, the particular quality of the light over the hills at dawn, and how he had found himself thinking, for the first time in years, that the countryside he had ridden across 1,000 times looked different when you had a reason to return to it. He wrote about his estate, about a problem with the Eastern Mill that had been consuming his secretary's patience for 3 weeks, and his own for considerably longer. He wrote about a dinner at Lord and Lady Harwick's house that had been every bit as tedious as anticipated. He wrote about Petra, who had apparently deduced everything from the expression on his face the moment he returned, and had said, simply, "Good," and gone back to her embroidery. And then, near the end, plainly and without drama, he wrote this: "I have been trying to identify what it is about you that I cannot set aside. I am a methodical man, and I prefer to understand the things that affect me. What I have concluded, after 8 days of thinking about it on horseback and in meetings, and at one particularly dull dinner, is that you are the only person I have ever met who makes me feel that honesty is not a liability. Most people want a version of me. The Duke, the title, the estate, the authority. You walked into my study and saw a man reading Aristotle and responded to that. I do not know what to do with that, except to say that it matters to me more than I have the vocabulary to properly express. She read that paragraph 3 times. Then she got out the paper and wrote back. Her letter was longer than she intended. She wrote about Ashfin and Drusilla's children, and the way little Pip had taken to following her around the house, narrating everything he saw with the confidence of someone who believed his observations were urgently needed. She wrote about the book he had lent her, which she had finished in 2 days, and had thoughts about that were going to require significant page space to properly express, so she was saving them for a separate letter. She wrote about her father's old garden in Westmore, which she had loved and missed, and how helping Hattie with the seedlings had made her feel something that was not quite grief and not quite joy, but sat comfortably between the two. And then she wrote this. You asked me once, at the bridge, why I could not afford to feel things. The truth, which I did not give you then because I was not ready, is that I spent 2 years after my father died being afraid. Not of poverty exactly, though that was part of it. Afraid of needing something and not having it. Afraid of building something and losing it. I became very good at wanting small things on purpose. It felt safer. You are not a small thing, Caerith Draven. You are the opposite of a small thing, and that is what frightens me. Not you specifically. The size of what this could become. She sealed the letter before she could reconsider any of it. The letters continued. They wrote twice a week, sometimes 3 times. His letters were always precise and unexpectedly funny, in a dry, restrained way that made her laugh out loud alone in her room and feel slightly embarrassed about it. Hers were longer and more winding, full of observations and arguments, and the occasional small sketch in the margin when words failed her. He wrote back about the sketches with a seriousness that she found absolutely hilarious and also deeply charming. The whole of Drusilla's household knew about the letters within a week, because Lyrian had made the mistake of laughing at one in the kitchen, and Hattie had seen her face and reported back to Drusilla with the thoroughness of a very small investigative journalist. Corbett pretended not to know anything, which was his preferred approach to domestic complexity. Drusilla made tea and said nothing helpful and smiled into her cup constantly. 3 weeks into the correspondence, something changed. A carriage arrived in Ashfin that had nothing to do with the Duke of Ravenmore. It belonged to a man named Sir Bastian Grohl, a baronet of middling fortune and enormous social ambition who had been a creditor of Lyrian's father and had been pursuing a claim against the Vold estate through various legal channels for the better part of 2 years. He had, apparently, received information that Lyrian was residing in Ashfin, and he had come in person, which was unusual and immediately alarming. Corbett came home from the market square with the news before the carriage had even properly stopped. Big black carriage, Vale crest on the creditor documents he was showing the solicitor's clerk, Corbett said, pulling Lyrian aside in the hall while Drusilla kept the children occupied in the kitchen. Name of Grohl. Do you know him? Lyrian's stomach dropped. I know of him. He held a significant debt against my father's estate. I believed it was settled in the sale of Westmore House. Apparently he believes otherwise, Corbett said. His face was kind, but serious. He was asking the clerk about you by name, Leary. She stood very still in the hall and thought quickly. A Grohl was not a dangerous man in the physical sense. He was a dangerous man in the legal and social sense, which in her position was considerably worse. If he pursued a claim against her personally, which was legally questionable, but not impossible given some of the terms of her father's original borrowing agreements, it could mean months of proceedings, public attention, the precise kind of exposure she had been avoiding. It could also reach the wrong ears very quickly. She went upstairs and wrote a letter to Caerith that was shorter and more urgent than any she had sent before. She told him about Grohl. She told him about the debt and the sale of Westmore House, and the 2 years of legal maneuvering she had already navigated alone. She told him she was not asking for help, but she was telling him because she had promised honesty, and this felt like something he needed to know, particularly given that his name was now, however quietly, connected to hers. She sent it by the fastest post available. His response arrived in 4 days, which was faster than should have been physically possible, and suggested he had written back the same evening her letter reached him. It was the shortest letter he had ever sent her. 3 sentences. Do not meet with Grohl under any circumstances. I have already spoken to my solicitor. This will be handled. She read it twice. Then she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not relief, though there was relief, but something older and more complicated. The particular feeling of someone reaching a hand through the dark and finding yours without being asked. She pressed the letter flat against her desk. She was not going to cry about 3 sentences from a duke to his solicitor. She absolutely was going to cry about 3 sentences from a duke to his solicitor. Grohl's carriage left Ashford 2 days later. The solicitor's clerk, a gossipy young man named Tivy, who told Drusilla's housekeeper everything, reported that Grohl had received a communication from a London law firm of considerable reputation, informing him that his claim against the Vial estate had been reviewed and found entirely without legal merit, and that any further pursuit of the matter would be contested with the full resources of their client. The clerk had no idea who the client was. Drusilla had a very strong suspicion. She sat across from Lyrian at the kitchen table that evening, with the children in bed, and Corbett diplomatically occupied elsewhere, and said, very quietly, "He handled it. His solicitor handled it," Lyrian said. Lyrian. It was a legal matter, and he had legal resources, and it was a practical solution to a practical problem. He rode to his solicitor within hours of receiving your letter, and deployed considerable resources on your behalf, without being asked, and without making you feel obligated, Drusilla said. That is not a practical solution. That is a man. Lyrian looked at the table. I know, she said softly. What are you going to do? Lyrian was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the night was warm and the window was open, and somewhere down the street, someone was playing a fiddle, slow and sweet and slightly melancholy. Or I think, she said carefully, that I am going to stop being so afraid. Drusilla reached across and squeezed her hand once, firmly, and said nothing else. The next letter Lyrian wrote was the longest she had sent. It covered 8 pages and ranged across philosophy and the political essays in the book he had lent her, and a very detailed account of Pip having an argument with a chicken in the back garden that morning. And it ended with this. I have been thinking about what you wrote, about honesty not being a liability. I have spent a long time treating my own feelings as liabilities, things to be managed rather than expressed. I am trying to do it differently. So here is an honest thing. I look forward to your letters more than I look forward to almost anything else. I read them twice when they arrive, once quickly because I cannot help it, and once slowly because I want to. I think about your face when I am doing ordinary things, and I do not try to stop myself anymore. I do not know what this is yet, but I have stopped being afraid of finding out. She sealed it and sent it, and then went and helped Drusilla with supper, and didn't think about it for the rest of the evening. She thought about it the entire evening. 4 days later, his reply came with something folded inside the letter. A small pressed flower, a sprig of something from his garden, she guessed, tucked between 2 pages without comment or explanation. Just there. Quiet and simple, and somehow more eloquent than anything words could have managed. She put it in the book he had lent her, between 2 pages near the end. But she was smiling so widely that Hattie walked into the room, took one look at her, and walked back out again to find Drusilla. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday morning in a cream envelope, sealed with the Ravenmore crest, and it was addressed not just to Lyrian, but to Miss Lyrian Vael and her cousin, Mrs. Drusilla Ashby, which told Lyrian immediately that Kerith had thought carefully about this and decided that arriving with a chaperone and a family member was the least threatening configuration possible. Drusilla read the invitation over Lyrian's shoulder without apology. "He is inviting us to Ravenmore Castle for a weekend," Drusilla said. "I can read," Lyrian said. "He has included a separate note for Corbett, explaining that the children are welcome and that there is a very large garden." Lyrian looked at the separate note, which she had not yet opened. "He wrote to Corbett. He wrote to my husband to ask permission to host his wife and her cousin at his estate," Drusilla said, with a tone that suggested this was either the most sensible or most devastating thing she had encountered in recent memory. "Lyrian. He wrote to Corbett." Lyrian set both letters down on the table and pressed her fingertips together. 6 weeks of letters. 6 weeks of careful, honest, increasingly warm correspondence that had moved from two strangers finding their way back to each other toward something she no longer had a word for that was small enough to feel safe. She had known this moment was coming. She had known that letters would eventually become insufficient. She had simply been enjoying the letters enormously and not thinking too hard about what came after them. But what came after them was apparently a weekend at Ravenmore Castle with her cousin, her cousin's husband, and 4 children, one of whom had recently demonstrated an ability to get jam on impossible surfaces. "It is very well managed," she said, mostly to herself. "He is a very well-managed man," Drusilla agreed. "What are you going to do?" Lyrian looked at the Ravenmore crest on the envelope. She thought about the pressed flower sitting in the book on her nightstand. She thought about 8 pages of honest letters and 3 sentences that had ended a 2-year legal problem, and a man standing on a bridge in the evening light, saying, "I do not want any woman in the kingdom," with such complete and uncomplicated sincerity that she had felt it in her bones. "I am going to need to borrow one of your trunks," she said. "Mine is not large enough." Drusilla made a sound that was attempting very hard to be dignified and failing completely. They arrived at Ravenmore Castle on a Friday afternoon, the entire Ashby family piled into a comfortable hired carriage that Lyrian only later discovered had been arranged and paid for without announcement by a man who had also apparently ensured that the road between Ashford and Ravenmore had been recently cleared of a fallen oak that had been blocking the eastern route for 2 weeks. She filed this information away alongside everything else she was accumulating about Kerith Draven. The castle was larger than she remembered. She had only seen it at night, lit by gala candles and her own heightened nerves. And in daylight it was something else, grand and old and serious, yet with gardens that spread out to the south in long green sweeps broken by stone walls and climbing roses. The roses were just coming into bloom, cream and deep red and pale yellow, and they filled the air with something so warm and sweet that little Pip stood in the carriage doorway with his mouth open for a full 10 seconds before Corbett lifted him out. Kerith met them in the entrance courtyard. He was dressed simply, no formal ducal presentation, just a dark jacket and riding boots, and he greeted Corbett with a handshake, and Drusilla with a bow, and the children with a patience and attentiveness that Lyrian watched from slightly to one side, with a feeling in her chest she could not entirely contain. Then he turned to her. 6 weeks of letters, and now his face in person again, in daylight, was in the grey eyes that she had memorized so precisely in her imagination, and had still somehow underestimated. "Miss Vale," he said. "Your Grace," she said. Entirely formal, entirely correct. Drusilla made a small noise behind her, that she chose not to acknowledge. Petra Dreven appeared at the top of the entrance steps and descended them with the energy of someone who had been waiting for this moment with barely contained enthusiasm, and was now deploying every ounce of aristocratic composure she possessed to appear merely pleasantly welcoming. She was small and dark-haired like her brother, and had the same grey eyes, but where his were still and watchful, hers were in constant movement, quick and warm and missing absolutely nothing. "Miss Vale," she said, taking Lyrian's hands in both of hers, "I have been looking forward to this with an indecent amount of enthusiasm, and my brother has asked me twice to moderate my expression, so I want you to know that this is my moderated expression." Lyrian liked her immediately and completely. "Lady Petra," she said, "I have heard a great deal about you. Wonderful things, I hope. He said you would start scheming immediately and to introduce yourself carefully." Petra turned to her brother with an expression of pure delight. "She is perfect," she said. "I am keeping her." Carith's expression was the particular one Lyrian had come to recognize from his letters, dry and warm at once, the face of a man who was genuinely happy and slightly embarrassed about how visibly it was showing. The weekend unfolded with a gentleness that Lyrian had not anticipated. She had braced for formality, or for the weight of the castle and the title and all the invisible architecture of his world, pressing down on whatever fragile thing they had built through letters. Instead, it was easy. Surprisingly, almost suspiciously easy. Petra took Drusilla and the older children on a long tour of the gardens with the energy of an extremely well-informed guide. Corbett and the castle's estate manager discovered a shared interest in mill engineering and disappeared into a detailed conversation that lasted most of Saturday. Little Pip attached himself to the head gardener, a broad, gentle man named Oswin, and followed him around the rose beds with his hands clasped behind his back in such precise imitation of Oswin's own walking posture that the whole kitchen staff were laughing about it by afternoon. Or baby Bram sat in his basket in the garden and observed everything with his usual serenity, which left Lyrian and Carith to walk the grounds together in the long, quiet hours of a warm afternoon, with the propriety of the weekend's arrangement making everything entirely correct, and the letters between them making everything feel like a continuation rather than a beginning. They walked the eastern garden wall, where the oldest roses grew, dark red and heavy-headed, and he told her the history of each section as if the garden were a text he had grown up reading. His grandmother had planted the eastern beds. His mother, who had died when he was 12, had added the white climbing variety along the south wall. He pointed them out without sentimentality, but with a care that said everything. "You loved her," Lyrian said. "She was the warmest person in a very cold house," he said. "When she died, the house became entirely cold for a long time." She thought about her own father, the warmest person in a financially disastrous house. "We both lost the warm one early," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said quietly. "We did." They stopped at a stone bench set into the garden wall and sat down without discussing it, the way two people sit when they have forgotten to keep track of time. The afternoon light came through the roses and broke into pieces across the path. "I want to show you something," he said. He produced a letter from his jacket. Not one of hers, she could see immediately. An older letter, the paper thicker, the handwriting different. "This is from my father," he said, "written to me the month before he died, but I have read it many times and disagreed with it many times, and recently I have been thinking about it differently." He held it out. She took it and read it. It was a letter about duty and legacy and the management of the Ravenmoor estate. It was precise and unsentimental, and contained detailed instructions about 3 different investment matters. And at the very end, in the same controlled handwriting, but with slightly more pressure on the pen, as if it had been written faster or with more feeling, were two sentences that sat apart from everything else on the page. Do not make my mistake. Find someone who makes the house warm again. She read those two sentences several times. Then she folded the letter carefully and handed it back. He knew, she said. I think he knew he had not, Kerith said. And he wanted something different from me. He just did not know how to say it as anything other than an instruction. She looked at him in the afternoon light, this man who had ridden an entire county to find her name, who had written 8 days' worth of thought into a single letter, who had dealt with a 2-year legal problem in 4 days without making her feel small, who was now showing her his dead father's private letter in a rose garden as an act of honesty so complete it made her throat tighten. Kerith, she said. I know, he said. I know this is moving faster than you said you wanted. It is not moving too fast, she said. I am simply trying to keep up with how sure I feel, because I did not expect to feel this sure, and I am not entirely certain what to do with it. He turned on the bench to face her properly. The roses moved in a slow, warm wind behind him. I have something to ask you, he said, and I want you to understand that there is no pressure attached to this question, and that whatever your answer is, it does not change what is already between us. I am not asking because I expect a particular answer. I am asking because I cannot ask. Her heart had started moving differently. Ask, she said. Will you let me court you properly? He said. Formally. With your cousin's permission, and in full view of everyone, and with all the attendant social complications that come with it. Not because I need the formality, but because you deserve the full thing. Not a secret, and not a letter, and not a walk in a garden where no one can see. The full thing, openly, with my name next to yours and everything that means. She looked at him for a long moment. The full thing. She had spent so long wanting small things on purpose, keeping her desires trim and manageable, never reaching for anything that could be pulled away. And here was this man, this impossible, steady, warm underneath all that grey man, asking her to reach for the largest possible thing in full daylight with everyone watching. Yes, she said. He exhaled. One quiet, controlled breath that told her he had not been as certain of her answer as he appeared. Yes, she said again, more firmly, because she wanted him to hear it properly. He reached out and took her hand, carefully, the way you hold something you intend to keep, and they sat in the rose garden while the afternoon went golden around them, and the sound of Pip arguing cheerfully with the head gardener drifted over the wall, and Lyrian felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time, like the house had gotten warm again. The Duke of Ravenmoor begins openly courting Lyrian Vael, a woman of modest background, shocking high society, because she is not from a powerful noble family, while aristocrats gossip and react with surprise or disapproval. The Duke ignores their opinions and visits Ashfen regularly to spend time with Lyrian. Their relationship grows naturally among her family, and Lyrian gradually realizes she has fallen in love with him. Despite the social consequences, the Duke reveals he intends to marry her. Lyrian admits she is no longer afraid of their differences, and boldly proposes to him first. He happily accepts. 3 months later, they marry at Ravenmoor Castle, surrounded by family and friends. In the end, Lyrian reflects that leaving him that first night, though painful, allowed them to truly find each other through letters, honesty, and choice. The castle, once cold, finally becomes warm again with their love.